Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So what I would do today is I will still refresh on. Um, I'll go through briefly what we did last week. Then we'll move further to um, today's topic. All right. So last week, um, part of the things we did was from the introductory part. I tried to define what economics is to you. And from the definition, we talked about that of Adam Smith, Alfred Marshall, Leonard Robinson, and the last one by myself, Abidemi Shomoy. And so, um, most specifically, I focused on that of my definition, which I talked about. Economics relates to how the economic agent allocates scarce resources. And what are those major three economic agents in a society? We have the individuals, we have the government, and we have individuals, firms, and the government. And I also talked about scarcity. I said scarcity relates to when we have insufficient resources as a result of unlimited human wants, or because human resources are not enough because our wants are uncertain. And I said those resources could be referred to as the factors of production. All right. And what are those factors of production? The factors of production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. What is the reward for land? Is rent. What is the reward for labor? Is wages and salary. What is the reward for um, capital? Is interest. And what is the reward for the last one, entrepreneurship, is profit or loss. Profit or loss. Okay, so from there, I was able to decide. I was able to differentiate between microeconomics and macroeconomics. Okay, macroeconomics deals with how individuals and firms allocate their scarce resources, while macroeconomics deals with the society as a whole. Deals with society as a whole. Okay. What else did we talk about? We also briefly talked about. So I've talked about this. I've talked about this. We talked about positive and normative, which I'm sure by now you know that positive is what is, and normative is what ought to be. Then we looked at these graphs using economic models, okay, which I said we're going to be doing a lot of it in um, in the consequent chapters. Okay, so for the second topic, so let's go straight to this chapter. All right. So for this chapter, because it's a very core aspect of your um, of microeconomics, and so we talked about the theory of consumer behavior. One second, give me 1 second. Okay, so under the theory of consumer behavior, all right, so I said the theory of consumer behavior is a fundamental economic concept that seeks to understand how individuals choose what goods and services to consume. This chapter will examine some assumptions of consumer preferences, utility, indifference cost, and budget line. So let us take a look at some of the assumptions or axioms of consumer preferences. Okay, I said preferences refer to an individual's likes or dislikes regarding goods and services. The consumer preferences are choices that consumers make to maximize their satisfaction. Choices arise due to scarcity. Okay, so you remember when we had to go through some definitions, the reason why we tend to manage the resources is because it's not enough. And so we have to find a way to allocate those resources in their best possible way. Okay, so that's why here you have choices arise due to scarcity. Thus, when making trade offs because of scarcity, some assumptions are made, and they are. So remember, last week I gave you basically under the assumptions or axioms of consumer preferences, I gave you three, which are completeness, transitivity, and more is better. Completeness, transitivity, and more is better. For completeness, I said a preference is said to be complete if, so I used iPhone and Samsung as a case study. I said, so your preference is said to be complete if, for example, your demand or your want or your like for an iPhone is greater than your like for Samsung. That's one preference. Okay. The other preference is you might also prefer iPhone to a Samsung. And the third preference is that you might equally like both of them. Okay, we usually say being indifferent. So the first one is A greater than B, the second one is B greater than A, and the third one is being indifferent, A greater than B and B greater than A. So it means that you like both goods equally. Okay, so remember the axioms of consumer preferences. The second one is transitivity. Okay, a preference is said to be transitive if, for example, you have three goods: an iPhone, um, an iPhone, a Samsung, and a Nokia. So, how do we know if your preference is transitive? If you prefer an iPhone to a Samsung, you would definitely prefer a Samsung to a Nokia, and therefore you would prefer an iPhone to a Nokia. Okay, if you prefer a Nokia to a Samsung to an iPhone, then we could say that you are irrational, or we could say that your preferences are inconsistent. Okay, your preferences are inconsistent. The third one is more is better. So I already emphasized that we all prefer more of a good. Everybody prefers more of a good. Okay, everybody prefers more of a good. All right. And the good you will prefer more of is called an economic good. An economic good is a good that is beneficial to you. It's beneficial to your health. It makes you much better. It makes you feel more satisfied. You can also have an economic bad. Okay. An economic bad is you don't want to consume more of it. For example, pollution. Okay. Traffic congestion. Okay. You don't want more of it because it makes you feel uncomfortable. It makes you feel uncomfortable. Okay, kayakers, are we clear to that point?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go on. All right. Okay, so this is the graph of more is better. Okay, and I said at this point B, you could see that you would like more of A and B. You at point B, this box here, are going to be taking more of A, and you're going to be taking more of B. Okay, this question mark, Karakes, can you remember how I explained these question marks? Can you remember?
I remember, but not exactly.
Okay, tell me what you remember.
There is no difference if it's like, how can I explain it?
So this question mark shows that we don't know if you are having more of both goods. We do know, but we don't know if you are satisfied. We don't know if you are satisfied. Okay? What does that mean? Okay, that means, for example, if you have more of A, B is constant, right? Is B constant? For good A, if you're having more of good A, is B constant? Is B?
Yes,
Yeah, so B is constant. If you're having more of good A, B is constant. So you're having more of A, but your B is not changing. So we can't say if you are maximizing your satisfaction. We cannot tell if you are maximizing your satisfaction. Okay? The same way for good B. You're having more of good B, but A is constant. Okay? What does that mean? We don't know if you are maximizing your satisfaction. So that is what these two question mark says. What about point R? What is point R? What is point R? What does point R tell us? Kayakes? What does point R mean? What does it mean? Okay, point R means that it is not, you are consuming less of good A and good B. You remember more is better is consuming more of good A and good B. All right. So R is inferior to B. R means you are consuming less of A and B, which shows it does not show more is better. Okay, so let's go to utility, right? Utility means satisfaction. It is a satisfaction a consumer derives from the consumption of goods and services. All right. Utility means satisfaction. For example, if you um, take buy something, for example, let's say a pair of shoes, you can we utility means the satisfaction you derive from buying those pairs of shoes. It is a satisfaction a consumer derives from the consumption of goods and services. All right. Utility can be cardinal utility. Cardinal utility means can be measured in terms of numbers. Okay, means utility is measurable. The utility of a commodity equals the money a consumer is willing to pay for it. The assumptions of cardinal utility include rationality, limited money income, okay, the utility is additive, constant utility of money, and diminishing marginal utility. Furthermore, the law of diminishing marginal utility to hold, it is assumed that goods are consumed for the law of diminishing marginal utility to hold. is assumed that goods are consumed within a given period. All right. Number two, ordinary utility. You remember I said ordinary utility means we cannot measure it in number, but we can only rank in terms of preferences. The ordinary utility assumption entail rationality, diminishing marginal rate of substitution, transitivity, and consistency of choice and non-certainty, which means non-satisfied. Okay? So let's take a look at cardinal utility. Under cardinal utility, of course, we talked about total utility, marginal utility, and the law of diminishing marginal utility. For total utility, it refers to the overall satisfaction derived from consuming a given amount or quantity of good. And for marginal utility, which means extra or additional. Marginal utility denotes additional utility you get from consuming an additional unit of a commodity. And how do you find it? Means changes in total utility divided by changes in quantity. Number three is the law of diminishing marginal utility. Carcass, can you remember how I explained the law of diminishing marginal utility?
Yes.
Okay, tell me.
You say there is decrease in satisfaction when there is decrease in satisfaction consumer gets when the consumer when they when a consumer consuming an additional unit of commodity.
Good, good. All right. So as a consumer consumes more and more of a commodity, that consumer will feel less satisfied. That consumer will not have much satisfaction as he should be. Okay. And this is the graph. For example, this graph explains that as you consume more of a good, your total utility increases, but your marginal utility is falling. When your total utility is at maximum, your marginal utility becomes zero. Once your total utility is falling, your marginal utility is negative. Negative means that if you are consuming, for example, you are consuming more of a good, it could actually affect you. It could make you feel enunciated, okay? So I said the consumer equilibrium for a single commodity case is marginal utility of X over price of X. And for more than one commodity case is marginal utility of X over P of X divided by marginal utility of Y over P of Y. So let's take a look at ordinal utility. Okay, so I already mentioned that you cannot measure it in terms of numbers, but we can only rank it in terms of preferences. By the time we are done now, I'm going to play some videos that can actually help you understand more. So we'll go through those videos together, with about 3 of them. Okay, so we'll go through indifference curve, 2 different videos on indifference curves, and we'll go to 2 different videos on the types of indifference curves. Those types of indifference curves that I mentioned regarding substitute, complementary, we'll take a look at them. Okay, so we'll take a look at, for example, take a look at the indifference curve. What does it mean? An indifference curve shows the combination of 2 goods that gives equal levels of satisfaction. The curve is also called iso-utility curve or equal utility curve. The curve is presented in figure 2.4. The characteristics of the indifference curves are: it is downward sloping, it is convex to the origin, indifference curves do not intersect, the intersection of the indifference curve means 2 different levels of satisfaction, and it violates the assumption of transitivity. In figure 2.3, for example, when I say violates the assumption of transitivity, in this figure right here, Sorry, excuse me. I mean, this figure height here, you could see that you could see that A is greater than B, or A is equal to B, and B is equal to C, but A is not equal to C. This is because C is on another indifference curve. Okay, C is on another indifference curve. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, so for the fourth one, I said higher indifference curve represents a higher level of satisfaction. Okay, and I show that here. Okay, so this is the diagram of an indifference curve. Okay, so I said higher indifference curve shows higher level of satisfaction. This is what it means here, and that is a demonstration of an indifference map. Okay, and an indifference map shows more than one indifference curve. So let us look at what an indifference map is. An indifference map shows more than one indifference curve. It shows an increase or a decrease in consumer satisfaction, given the income and the market price of goods and services. The graphs can be seen in figure 2.5, which I just showed you. Marginal rate of substitution. What does it mean? It is the rate at which one good is substituted for another, while keeping the level of satisfaction the same. The slope of the indifference curve depicts the marginal rate of substitution. Slope. This is the slope here. This is the slope of the indifference curve. So, are we clear up to this stage, Kayakes? Is it clear up to this stage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we take a look at diminishing marginal rate of substitution. It's an economic principle that states that as consumers consume more of one good, the amount of another good they are willing to give up to get one more unit of the first good decreases. This is because the consumer satisfaction from consuming the first good increases at a diminishing rate. For example, a consumer who is hungry is willing to give up a lot of money for a chicken burger. However, as they eat more chicken burgers, they become less and less hungry, and they are willing to give up less and less money for each additional chicken burger. Just like an example I gave when I was explaining the law of diminishing marginal utility. Okay, the more and more you consume something, the lesser satisfaction that you have, and so you will not be willing to give up much money for it. Okay, so what are the other types of indifference curves? We call perfect substitutes. Perfect substitutes are substitutes or goods that can completely replace another. And this is the graph. A perfect complement are goods that complement one another. Okay. While, yeah, so budget line. What does a budget line show? A budget line shows a combination of two goods a consumer can afford with a given income and price. Okay, what that means is that what determines the um, more of the goods that you consume will be dependent on the money that you earn and the price of that good. So, whichever way, for example, if your income increases, what that shows is your wealth also increases. And so you'll be able to consume more of that good. All right. If income increases and the price does not change, okay. On the other hand, if your income does not increase, for example, if the price falls and your income stays the same, then you will be able to afford more of that good, which still also means that your wealth increases. So the budget line just shows the amount of goods that you can afford, okay, given the income that you earn and the price of those goods you want to buy. Okay, and I said this can be seen in figure 2.8. In Caracas, can you explain this graph for me? Explain the graph for me.
Uh, we see the budget line is red.
Okay.
If I, I can say above the budget line,
Okay, so what does that mean for that area of unaffordable?
unaffordable means you cannot have it. You don't have
You cannot have
money
it. Yeah, you don't have
to
money.
have it.
Good. What about that affordable inside that box?
Inside means you can have it. You can afford it. You
You
have
can afford
money.
it. You have money.
Yes.
Okay, so for example, if you look at this equation, P of A times Q of A plus P of B times Q of B equals Y. Y means income. Price of A simply means price of good A times the quantity of good A plus price of good B times the quantity of good B. What that means is that by the time you buy both quantity of A and quantity of B, it will be equal to your income. Okay, that is this line here, this red line and inwards. Okay, anything outside that line cannot be afforded. Okay, so let's take a look at the chapter overview. Consumer preferences are choices that consumers make to maximize their satisfaction. The assumptions of consumer preferences include completeness, transitivity, and more is better. Utility means satisfaction. 4. Cardinal utility can be measured in numbers, utils. An ordinal utility can be ranked in terms of preferences. Okay, so let's do a short quiz. So, what are the assumptions of consumer preferences?
We have three assumptions:
Yeah,
completeness,
completeness,
transitivity, and more is good.
more is better, good. All right. Two,
More
what
is
does it,
good.
more is better? Two, what does it mean when we say more of a good is better? Can you explain in a graph? You can't draw the graph now, but is this something you can explain? What does it mean if we say more of a good is better? What does that mean?
I mean, like we we like consume more goods than to less.
Good. We like to consume more of a good than less of it.
So
And can you explain this in a graph?
we draw the graph where
Do
there
you know the
is
graph? Do you
question
know the
mark,
graph?
two question
Yes.
mark,
Good.
and R B.
And B, yeah, good. All right. Question 3. What is the difference between economic good and economic bad?
Economic good is positively benefits to people,
Yeah,
and economic bad has a negative impact
on
on
humans,
people.
on we humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. What is utility?
Utility means satisfaction.
Means satisfaction. Okay.
Yeah.
Or utility means the satisfaction a consumer derives from
From the
consuming a good,
consumption of good and
from the consumption of goods and services. Good. Five. How is utility measured?
utility measure.
How do you measure utility? Try to remember, how do we measure utility? We've talked about it today.
When we talk about utility, we see cardinal and ordinal utility.
Good. Good. That is how it is measured. So, what is cardinal
Um,
utility?
cardinal utility can be measured by in number.
And measured in terms of numbers. What are some
Yeah.
of the assumptions of cardinal utility?
We have total utility, marginal
No,
utility,
assumptions. Under those
assumption.
assumptions, I mentioned constant
Yeah.
marginal utility of money, utility is additive.
Diminishing marginal utility.
Good. Diminishing marginal utility. All right.
Yes.
Um, what is ordinal utility?
Ordinal utility means utility cannot be measured in
It
number, but can be ranking in preferences.
can be ranked in terms of preferences. Good. All right. So, what is the consumer equilibrium for a single good and for multiple goods?
Consumer equilibrium. Okay. Consumer equilibrium means when for single case is when marginal utility is equal to price,
Good.
something like that.
Yes, you're right. When marginal utility of X equals to price of X. What about the multiple goods?
Let's forget we have the same satisfaction when we spend money in that one. I didn't understand why it's
Okay, so the equation is marginal utility of X over P of X equals marginal utility of Y over P of Y equals marginal utility of, depending on the number of goods that you are consuming. Okay, that's what you're going to have. So, number eight, what is the consistency of choice?
consistency of choice.
Yes. What does it mean when we say that a consumer or kayaker's choice is consistent? What does it mean?
Transitive.
Good. Transitive. All right.
Yeah.
Transitivity. Yeah. Number nine, what is an indifference called?
Mm, the combination of two goods.
Mm-hmm.
Eh?
Yeah, you are not done. Combination of good, two goods. Yeah.
Combination of two goods that give equal satisfaction, equal level of satisfaction.
Good. The combination of two goods that gives an equal level of satisfaction. What that means is that it doesn't matter the amount of goods that you consume, whether 10 of good A or 20 of good B, both of them will still give you an equal level of satisfaction. All right. What is an indifference map?
Mm. Different marks show more than one and different good.
So, an indifference map shows more than one indifference curve. What is the marginal rate of substitution?
Marginal rate of substitution is rate at which one good is substituted for another while keeping the level of satisfaction the same.
Yeah, so marginal rate of substitution is the rate at which you substitute one group for another. The slope of the indifference curve measures the slope of the indifference curve. What does it
Yes,
measure? What does it measures what?
mar- hmm,
Say it
marginal.
again. Marginal rate of substitution. So that slope of the indifference curve, what does it measure? It measures the marginal rate
Marginal
of
of
substitution.
substitution.
Okay.
Yeah,
Number 12. What does the law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution say?
it says um, when it, the decrease in satisfaction that the consumer gets from consuming uh, more
So,
additional commodity.
so what that means is that if you keep giving up an amount of money to consume more of a good, what
Mm,
happens is that you get to tend to have less satisfaction and you give
mm,
up less. Okay, you will give up less money uh, to have more of, I mean, you give up less money so that you will not be able to consume more of that good because you feel less satisfied. Okay, the law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution says that the more and more you give up some money to have a good, you'll be having lesser satisfaction on that good you are consuming, and so that will you eventually give up less money. You eventually give up less money. Okay, what are perfect substitutes?
perfect substitute is when the utility derived from each good is the same. Last time you gave me the example of coffee and tea.
Yeah. So the utility you have from both goods are the same. And so you is either you give up one to is either you give up coffee to take tea, or you take tea and you give up coffee. Okay, it's
Okay.
either of the two because the utility you derive from both of them are the same. Yeah, what are perfect complements?
Perfect complements are the good that come together
That
jointly.
are used jointly. Okay, give me an example.
Shirts and shoes,
Yeah,
table
your
and chair.
substantial table and your chair, your left leg shoe and your right shoes. Okay, so those are some of the questions. So let me I'm coming. Let me play. I'm coming. So I'll play some videos. I'll first play it in the friends call. Then I would, or let me play. Coming. Yeah, let me first play types of indifference calls. Wait. So you can mute your mic. Don't worry. Um,
I've been drawing my indifference curves to look something like this. So that's the vertical axis, that's one good, so this is the quantity of good A, this is the quantity of good B, and I've been drawing the indifference curves like this. So it might look like that. That's one indifference curve. Then another indifference curve would look like that. And I could keep drawing indifference curves. And this is what an indifference curve would look like for two normal goods. Let me write that down. Normal. These are normal goods. And the reason why normal goods indifference curves would look like that, or when I'm trying to figure out the combinations of two normal goods, is because if I have a lot of one good, so this point right over here, I have a lot of good A, and I have very little of good B, I would be willing to trade off a lot of A to get one extra B. But if all of a sudden I have a lot of B and a lot less A, I would be willing to trade off very little A to get an incremental B. So that's why we have kind of this inward bow-shaped curve right over here. Or you could, mathematically, it looks like it's part of a hyperbola. And so that's what normal goods, the indifference curves if you're trading off between normal goods, would look like. Now let's think about the indifference curve. So it would be this kind of curve thing. The marginal rate of substitution would constantly be changing. Now let's think about different types of goods. Let's say that this is the quantity of $5 bills, and let's say that this is the quantity of $10 bills, and we're talking about the good now is actually the dollar bills. So let's say that this right over here is 10 $5 bills. Well, that's $50. I'd be indifferent between that and 5 $10 bills. So this is 5 right over here. And any point in between, I would be indifferent because I'm always willing to trade off 2 $5 bills for 1 $10 bill. So it would my indifference curve would be linear in this case. My indifference curve would be linear. So no matter what, on this indifference curve, I'm always willing, if I want to get one extra $10 bill, I'm always willing to give up 2 $5 bills, which makes complete sense because 2 $5 bills are completely equivalent to 1 $10 bill. And we could take it to another extreme. Let's say I have an indifference. Well, let me draw the quantity of, I don't know, the quantity of M&Ms, of, let's say red M&Ms, red M&Ms, and I should have done that in red, but I won't. And then let's say this is the quantity of blue M&Ms, and let's say that I actually am indifferent between red and blue M&Ms. Some people aren't. Red M&Ms and blue M&Ms. So having 10 red M&Ms to me is completely equivalent of having 10 blue M&Ms. So I'm willing to trade them off one for one. I don't care. I get the same total utility. So in this case, assuming that I really don't care the color of my M&M, I am completely indifferent as I swap them out. And so this is a case of perfect substitutes. Perfect substitutes. Now, I'd always be happy to have more M&Ms, so another indifference curve might look something like this. But it's always going to have a slope of -1. I always giving up one red M&M to get one blue M&M, then I would be indifferent. And likewise over here, you could have another indifference curve between $5 bills and $10 bills that looks like this. But the slope would be the exact same thing. Now, the last situation I want to think about is what we'll call perfect complements. So goods that if you have one of them, you really need the other one. Otherwise, one of the two is somewhat useful. And maybe the most pure version of perfect complements, let me write it over here. Perfect complements. So let's say that this is the quantity of right shoes. So the quantity of right shoes, and this is the quantity of left shoes. So obviously, if we're talking about just one pair, you have one of each. Now, do you care if you really get more left shoes? No, you have the exact same preference. It doesn't really change your life. You have the same total utility. In fact, it might even be negative because you have to store them all. But let's just assume you have the same total utility and you don't get any benefit of having those spare shoes in case your shoe gets destroyed or anything like that. In terms of what you can get out of it, what you can wear, you get the same utility. And so you're really indifferent no matter how many extra left shoes someone gives you. And you'd also be indifferent no matter how many extra right shoes how many right shoes someone gives you. Now, you would be happier if you had maybe 2 right shoes and 2 left shoes, because now you have 2 pairs. So this would be another indifference curve. And once again, if you have 2 right shoes, you really don't care how many more than 2 left shoes you get. And if you have 2 left shoes, you really don't care how many more than 2 right shoes you get. So this indifference curve in green is clearly preferable to the one in white, but along each indifference curve, it doesn't benefit you to have 3 left shoes and only 2 right shoes. So this is what perfect complements would look like. This is perfect substitutes, and this is normal goods.
So, Kayakes, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Let me see. I wanna play one more.
As we make choices about what to buy, we're constrained by our own income and the prices of things. But our tastes or our preferences for what we like or don't are just as important. For simplicity's sake, let's stay in our too-good world and look at how you might choose between pizzas and coffee. Suppose I asked you which of the following combinations you would rather have. This is like me asking you to rank them in order of preferences. Let's plot them on a graph. On the x-axis, we have the number of pizzas per week, and on the y-axis, we have cups of coffee per week. Because we view pizza and coffee as good things that bring us utility, we always want more of them. Well, at least I do. Obviously, 3 pizzas and 3 cups of coffee are preferred to just 2 pizzas and 2 cups of coffee. Similarly, 1 pizza and 1 cup of coffee are less preferred to 2 pizzas and 2 cups of coffee. Consider this combination, 2 pizzas and 2 cups of coffee. In general, any combination in this region is preferred to the original combination. Think about why that is. Any point here represents a combination of pizza and coffee such that you get more of at least one of them. Maybe even more of both. And having more of what brings us utility is better. Any combination of goods in this region, however, means you'll be getting less of at least one of the goods. Maybe even less of both. And that will leave you worse off. Now that we know what you prefer and what you don't prefer, let's think about the combinations of goods that will leave you indifferent. You may not mind if instead of having 2 pizzas and 2 cups of coffee, you have just 1 pizza and 3 cups of coffee, or 3 pizzas and 1 cup of coffee. Anytime someone asks you if you would rather have one combination of goods versus another, and you go, I don't care, you are saying you are indifferent between the two. The line that connects the combinations that leave you indifferent is called your indifference curve, and each point on the line represents the same amount of satisfaction or utility. Just like we drew the indifference curve for that first combination of goods, 2 pizzas and 2 cups of coffee, we could draw several other curves, each of which representing different levels of utility. This would be your indifference map. Notice, your indifference curve isn't a straight line. That's because its slope changes as you move between different combinations of goods. The slope of the indifference curve is called the marginal rate of substitution, and it measures the rate at which you are willing to forego cups of coffee in order to get 1 more pizza, while keeping your utility constant. The easiest non-calculus way to find the marginal rate of substitution at a given point on the indifference curve is to draw a straight line tangent to the curve at that point. For example, suppose you're considering this combination. Note, it has very few pizzas and many cups of coffee. The marginal rate of substitution is 4. This means that you are willing to forego 4 cups of coffee to consume 1 more pizza. As you move along the indifference curve and start consuming more pizza, your marginal rate of substitution falls. Why is that? If you are thinking marginal utility, you nailed it. Each additional pizza you consume provides you with less utility than the previous one. But now remember, you are on an indifference curve, so maintaining your level of utility implies giving up 1 cup of coffee after another. But here's the thing. As you are left with fewer and fewer cups of coffee, their marginal utility increases, and the harder it is for you to give them up to get that additional pizza. Your marginal rate of substitution is 2. This means that you are willing to give up 2 cups of coffee to consume 1 more pizza. That's 2 fewer cups of coffee than you were willing to give up when you had less pizza and more cups of coffee. It's because your willingness to give up cups of coffee decreases the more pizza you have that the marginal rate of substitution decreases along an indifference curve. Most indifference curves look just like the one in our example. They are bowed inward. This is because the marginal rate of substitution changes depending on how much of the goods you have and your willingness to substitute between them. But there are exceptions, and indifference curves can look very different. Suppose you view 2 goods as substitutes. To me, that's juice. Maybe you too don't care if you drink orange juice or apple juice. In this case, you will be equally happy if you drink 2 glasses of orange juice and 2 of apple juice, or if you drink 3 glasses of orange juice and 1 of apple juice. Here, your marginal rate of substitution is constant along your indifference curves, and is 1. Perfect complements are another extreme case. Suppose you're eating hot dogs. You want 1 hot dog bun for every hot dog. If I give you 2 hot dog buns, but just 1 hot dog, you will not be better off because you like your hot dogs with hot dog buns. In this case, your indifference curves will look like right angles. Indifference curves come in many shapes and sizes, but they do have a few things in common. When we talk about goods, the first thing you note is that indifference curves slope downward. Why? Because the only way for us to keep utility constant when consuming more of one good is by consuming less of the other. We also assume that more is better. That means that indifference curves that are farther away from the origin, are farther to the right, represent higher levels of utility. However, if we're talking about bads, say pollution or trash, then the less we have of them, the better. In this case, we are better off when we get closer to the origin. Another important property of indifference curves is that they cannot intersect each other. This makes sense. If we allow 2 indifference curves to cross, we are saying that the combination of goods at the intersection point represents, at the same time, different levels of utility. This makes no sense. Economists don't like things that don't make sense, so we assume this cannot happen, despite people being different and exhibiting different preferences towards goods. While preferences are solely about our tastes and dreams, our actual decisions require us to get reality into the picture. We do that when we make our decisions constrained by our income and the prices the market invisibly determines. We look at that next.
You're on.
Is it clear, Kayakers? Is it clear?
Yes, so
Okay, all right. So we'll go on a 10 minutes break. You don't need to log off. You can just mute. I won't go out. We'll still be recording, but in 10 minutes, we'll be back, all right?
okay.
Yeah. You don't need to log out, just mute, that's all. Okay, so let's get back to class right now. So we're going to treat individual demand. Yeah, let me switch that to so yeah. So um, let me split this to 200. So can you see my slide? You can see my slide, right?
Yes.
All right. So so far we've done the introduction to micro, more of looking at the foundations of micro. We've investigated the theory of consumer behavior. We talked about indifference curves, budget line, perfect substitute, perfect complements, cardinality, ordinality, axioms of consumer preferences. Now let's go to individual demand. That is your demand, all right? And we'll start with the definition of what demand is. What is demand? Demand can be defined as the quantity of goods and services a consumer is willing to buy. Okay, that in bracket I put capacity. Okay, at a particular price and at a particular point in time. This is referred to as an effective demand, and it's an effective demand because it is backed up by the ability to pay. You have money to pay for those goods, and so we call it an effective demand. Assuming you just you are willing to buy it, but you don't have money to pay, is an ineffective demand because you don't have the resources to pay for that good. Okay, so what does the law of demand state? The law of demand states that other things being equal, ceteris paribus, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. The higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. Okay, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded, and the lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. Okay, which is just normal. You would, if you go to the market and you see that the price of goods are falling, you will be willing to buy more. But if the price of goods are rising, you will not be willing to buy more of the good. You will be willing to buy less because that has decreased your purchasing power. Okay? You understand that, Kayakes? Is that clear?
Yes.
All right. So we go to demand schedule. Well, what does this demand schedule mean? Okay. The demand schedule just shows the relationship between the price of a good and quantity demand. It shows how much of a good that the consumer buys as price changes. So you know what demand is? The amount of goods a consumer is willing to buy, willing and able to buy. Okay, law of demand says an increase in price, the lower the quantity demanded, and there's a decrease in price, the higher the quantity demanded. And the demand schedule just shows, for example, you like if you like buying, um, let me see, if you like buying shoes, for example, a demand schedule just shows you every time you go to the market, the amount of shoes that you get to buy. Maybe when there's a decrease in price, you buy one, you find out that the price has further decreased, you bought another one. So a demand schedule just shows the list of your financial activities as regards to the purchase of a good. All right. So out of the demand schedule, you are able to get your the demand curve. So a demand curve is a graph that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded. It shows the price of a good and quantity demanded. A demand curve is downward sloping and it shows a negative or an inverse relationship with price. The demand curve is downward sloping and it shows a negative or an inverse relationship with price. So now I'm going to differentiate between changes in quantity demanded and changes in price. Okay, I'm going to differentiate between changes in quantity demanded and changes in price. And Caracas, can you read 3.1.5? Can you read it out?
Sorry?
Read 3.1.5. Where you see changes in quantity demanded, can you read it out?
Yes.
Oh yeah, read it.
Change in quantity demand, it is only affected by the price of the product, with all other factors remaining constant. Its change, expansion or contraction, occur along the demand curve. We sometimes refer to this change as the moment along the demand curve. This further presents in figure 3.1.
Okay, so a change in quantity demanded is only affected by the price of the product, with all other factors remaining constant. Its changes, expansion or contraction occurs along the demand curve. We sometimes refer to these changes as the movement along the demand curve. Okay, this is further presented in figure 3.1. Okay, so can you give me some of the things that makes you to buy a good? Anything. What are some of the factors that determines you buying a commodity? What are some of the factors that determines whether you buy a good or not? Can you give me some factors that determines whether you buy a good or not? Okay, characters, give me some factors that determines whether you buy a good or not. What determines you buying a shoe or something?
I don't understand it. The
Okay,
question.
so if you what do you like to buy?
Bread.
Bread. What do you like
Yes.
to buy? Okay, you like to buy ekmek, right?
Yes.
So tell me what determines you buying ekmek? What makes you to, what determines if you will buy ekmek or not? What are some of the determinants?
Money.
Money. That's the price. What else? What else? Or don't say ekmek. Tell me another thing that you love to buy besides ekmek. So shoes. Let's say shoes.
Shoes.
Let's say Nike shoes. So tell me what determines if you buy Nike shoes? Price. Okay, one. What else?
Price, quality.
Quality. Okay. What else?
I think
Just think. It's
price
about
and
your.
quality.
No, that's not all. Is that all that makes you? So aside price and quality, what else?
The reputation of the shoes, if it's durable or not.
And that's the quality. So that's quality and price. What else? What else aside price and quality? Think.
Quantity. No.
Think about yourself. If you are going to the market to buy a shoe, aside the price and quality, what else? What is the first thing aside the price, for example? What is some of the first thing that you think about when you see a shoe? What makes you? What's the first determinant?
if other people buy also these shoes, like demand.
Demand. Okay, aside demand, you've not mentioned why do you go and buy a shoe first? Why do you buy a shoe in the first instance? Why do you? You've not mentioned one of the most important things. What about you liking the shoe? If you don't like a shoe, are you going to buy it?
No.
No, no. So the first thing is, aside money, is you need to like it. You need to, aside the price and quality, you first, oh, I like that shoe. Then you now begin to ask questions like, how much is it? Is it of good quality? Is it in, I mean, but first of all, you need to like the shoe. Now I want to explain with this analysis I want to have given to you. I want to explain that of changes in quantity demanded. Okay, so changes in quantity demanded simply means when it is only when the demand for the shoe is only affected by the price. Okay, what that means is that when Kayakes saw a shoe, and the only thing that determines whether she buys the shoe or not is the price of that shoe, just the price alone. She's not concerned about quality. She's not concerned about demand. She's not concerned about likes and other factors. She's just concerned about, oh, is the shoe affordable? The price. So changes in quantity demanded, like I mentioned it is only affected by the price of the product, with all other factors remaining constant. It is only affected by the price of the product, with all other factors remaining constant. Do you understand?
No, sir. Can you repeat,
Okay.
please?
So
Affect the price.
okay, let me explain again. We can have changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded. Okay? Changes in demand of a good and changes in quantity demanded of a good. So I'm explaining changes in quantity demanded. So I asked you a question. I said, what are some of the factors that determine if you buy a shoe? So we established some factors such as you have to like the shoe, it has to be of good quality. What else? You what else did we mention? Quality. You have to like the shoe, and maybe it has to be in good demand. Also, there are some other factors that could affect that. All right, or your taste, your fashion, the weather. Does it fit the season? Is it a winter shoe? Is it a summer shoe? Those are some of all the factors that will determine. For example, you can't go and start buying. This is summer. You are going to buy a winter shoe. Even though you like it, you can't buy it now because we are in summer. Okay. And so to explain changes in quantity demanded, if the only thing that makes Kaya Cares to buy a shoe, the only thing she actually considered when buying a shoe, while all other factors, things like taste, fashion, season, likes, if all those factors remains constant, and the only thing she considered before buying that shoe is just the price of that shoe. So Caracas went to the market, and the only thing she considered is, oh, how much is the shoe? All other factors are constant. You are not considering all other factors. You are just considering the price. So if just the price is what makes you to buy that commodity, then we say that is changes in quantity demanded. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that's changes in quantity demanded. If just the price is only the demand of that good is only affected by the price. You are just considering the price alone. Okay. Now, For changes in quantity demanded, it's something you have to pay attention to. The movement is along the demand curve. Let me show you what that means. Along this demand curve. You see that red line? So for changes in quantity demanded, your changes will be along the demand curve. So let us look at this graph. For this graph, you see, can you tell me, what is the law of demand? What does it say? Law of demand.
When price is higher, quantity is lower.
Okay, can you
The
explain,
quantity.
use this graph to explain the law of demand for me?
Here, P1. Mm,
Okay, use this graph to explain it to me.
price is higher, quantity is lower. Right. Okay, P1 is higher and Q1 is lower. They are decrease.
So
P1 increase, Q1
if price,
increase.
if price, see that arrow, if price increases from P
To
to
P1,
P1,
Q1 decrease.
from no, quantity decreases from Q to Q1, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
if P increases from P to P1, quantity decreases from Q to Q1.
Q to Q1, yes.
Yeah. What about if P decreases from P to P2? What happens to quantity?
Quantity increase to Q to Q2.
Quantity increases from Q to Q2.
Q2,
All right. So
yes.
that is its simple law of demand. Okay. So remember that I said that for changes in quantity demanded, the movement is always along the demand curve. So these changes occurs along the demand curve. For example, if price increases from P to P1, your quantity increases from Q to Q1, it is called a contraction. If price falls from P to P2 and your quantity increases from Q to Q2, it is called an expansion. It's called an expansion. Okay? It's called an expansion. All right? So is this graph clear, or you want me to explain?
This graph is for change in quantity demand.
Good. It's for changes in quantity demanded. Okay. This graph is for change in quantity demanded. I'm using it to explain um,
The law of demand.
yes, I'm using it to explain the law of demand. Then I'm using it to explain to you that the movement is usually along the demand curve. The movement is usually along this demand curve. And you remember, for changes in quantity demanded, all other factors are constant. All other factors are constant. The only thing we tend to consider is price. So we consider the price of the product while all other factors remaining constant. So the changes usually along the demand curve, either a contraction or an expansion.
Expansion.
Good job. All right. So here it says it changes, expansion or contraction or law occur along the demand curve. We sometimes refer to these changes as the movement along the demand curve. This is further presented in figure 3.1. So let's explain changes in demand. For changes in demand, Changes in demand shows a shift in demand either to the left decrease or to the right increase. These changes may be are caused by other factors while the price of the product remains constant. This is further presented in figure 3.2. Okay, so you remember that I told you that there are different factors that can determine you purchasing a commodity. Yes? And I said those factors include price of the product. For example, you can also have price of other products. You can have taste and fashion. You can have season. You can have government policies. There are so many factors that can determine it. For changes in quantity demanded, remember, all other factors are constant. We only consider the price of the product. And the movement is along the demand curve, right? But for changes in demand, the price of the product is constant while we consider other factors that can affect you purchasing a particular good. So the price of the product is constant while we consider other factors that determines you purchasing other goods. Okay? Is that clear?
No, sir.
Don't worry, I'm going to explain the graph. So first of all, you understand changes in quantity demanded, right? Is that clear?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so you remember that I asked you a question. What are some of the factors that can make you to purchase a good? We say price of that particular good. You know, if you say price of that particular good, price of other substitutes can make you to purchase that good. Is that true?
Yes.
For example, if Adidas is more expensive, of course you go for Nike. Okay, that's what it means by when I say price of other substitute. If Adidas is expensive, of course, you will go for you will go for Nike. All right. So, but for changes in demand, you see this price. See this horizontal line P. See that? Can
Yes.
you see the horizontal line P?
Yes.
What that means is that we assume that the price of the product remains constant. Okay, let's assume that the price is 5,000. So you are not considering the price. You are looking at some of the other factors that can make you to consume that commodity. Okay, aside the price of the product, you are looking at other factors. Okay, and those other factors can make you consume more of that good or consume less of the good. If you are consuming more of the good, for example, will your demand curve shift to the right or will it shift to the left?
You're right.
To the right. If you are consuming less, the demand curve shift
To
to
the
the
left.
left. Okay, so this graph right here simply shows changes in demand. And for changes in demand, the movement is not along the demand curve. For changes in demand, your demand curve shift to the right or shift to the left. So we assume that the price of that product you want to buy, we assume that it's constant while we consider all the factors. What that means is that you are not looking at the price of the product. That's not what determines if you buy the good. What determines if you buy the good is the price of other products, taste, fashion, weather, government policies. So there are so many things that can enable you buy a good aside just the price. Okay, and so this is what the graphs look like. So in explaining changes in quantity demanded and changes in demand, I will move to what is called demand functions. Okay, now what does demand function mean? What does it mean? It's just simply telling you the mathematical relationship between quantity demanded of a product and the factors affecting it. What that means is that I'm just mathematically saying that what are some of the factors that makes kayakers to buy a shoe? What are some of those factors? So demand function is just a mathematical expression of what makes kayakers to buy a shoe. Do you understand kayakers?
Yes, sir.
It's just a mathematical expression of the factors that determines if you buy a shoe or not. For example, this is a demand function, and this shows that uh, a quantity demanded of good X is a function of price of good X, price of other goods. That's what it means by price of Y, income, taste, consumer expectation, population, government. There's so many factors that can determine if you buy a good. Okay, so I'm going to ask a quick question. So my first question is, if so this is the graph of this particular graph is the graph of good X. Okay, the graph of good X, quantity demanded of X. Okay, if income increases, if income increases, if income increases, will demand curve shift to the right or shift to the left? If income increases, will demand
Demand,
curve, where will it shift to?
demand to the left.
If income increases, why will it shift to the left? Tell me why will it shift to the left? You know what it means when we say if your income increases? Tell me, what does it mean when we say if income increases?
The product increase.
No, your income. What does income mean? What does income? What does it mean?
Oh, income is like the resource money.
So your money increases, right?
Yes,
Okay. So if your money increases, where will the demand curve shift to? What would you do?
to the right.
You need to shift to the right because that means that you consume more of good X. That's what
Yes.
it means. You consume more of good X. Okay. If price of Y is substitutes, okay, you know what
Mm,
substitutes are, right?
yes.
Okay. So if price of Y now substitute goods, if price of Y increases, what happens?
First of all, increases.
Yeah.
The demand will shift to the
Substitute goods. Substitutes.
substitute. You is like you have to give up one to get one more.
Okay. So if you So so you have to give up one to get another. So if
Yes.
the price of Y increases, what
I will not.
happens?
Demand will
What
shift
happens to the where will it shift
to the left.
if price of Y increases? Remember, this is the demand curve of good X.
Okay.
Yeah,
It will shift also to the right.
it will shift to the right because what that
Why?
means is that remember this is the graph of this chart. This is for good X. So, and I ask a question: if the price of Y increases, price of Y is a substitute. If price of Y increases, are you not going to consume? Are you going to consume more of good X or less of good X?
More.
More of good X. So more means the graph is shifting to the right. Less means the graph is shifting to the left. But the reason why the graph is shifting to the right is because you are the price of Y is substitute. Substitute increases. If substitute, if the price of Y, which is a substitute, if it increases, if this is the graph of good X, then that means is that you will consume more of good X. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay. Now, next question. You of course you know if taste and fashion increases for good X, what happens? To the right or to the left?
To the right.
To the right. Good. Okay. If
Yes.
consumer expectation increases, what would you have?
Hmm. I'm confused right now, teacher.
Okay, so don't be confused. Just if you look at this graph, it is for uh, it is for good X. Okay, if you look at this graph, it is for good X. If consumer expectation increases, what that tells you is that demand for good X will shift to
The right.
it will shift. Just note that right means you are consuming more of a good, left means you are consuming less of a good. So if consumer expectation increases, you are consuming more of the good. Okay, if taste and fashion increases, you are consuming more of the good. So it shifts to the right. If income increases, you are consuming more of a good, so it shifts to the right. Okay, and
Mm.
price of Y increases, substitute, it shifts. That means you are going to consume more of X because price of Y increases. Let me now ask, what about complements? If price of Y for complement, if it increases, that means if Y and X are complement goods, where will this curve shift to, left or right? Complements.
To the right.
So if price of Y increases, you would consume, would you buy more of, if they are complements, they are used together, would you increase your consumption of it or reduce your consumption?
I will increase.
So let's see complements. If the price of toothpaste goes up, are you
Mm.
going to increase your quantity of, if the price of toothpaste goes up, are you going to buy more brush or buy less brush?
Less.
Less brush. Okay, so let's check if the price of a complement
Teacher, is it possible to have some video that can explain change in demand, the graph of changing demand?
Yes, that's why I'm checking. Let me check. I'm coming. And that's what I'm checking for. Okay, let's check this. Let me play. Okay, let's do this.
Into the difference
Can you hear
between
it?
demand and
Yes.
quantity demanded.
All
In
right.
particular, we're going to focus on change in demand versus change in quantity demanded. And so just as context, I have price versus quantity here for brand X of cars in a certain market. And you see the demand curve for brand X of cars. And we see that it follows the classic law of demand. At a high price, there is a low quantity demanded. And so this is already trying to draw the distinction. A quantity demanded, so I'll call this QD1, is associated with a particular point on the demand curve. It's not the whole curve itself. When people talk about demand, they're talking about the whole curve. But just following on what I just said, following the law of demand, at a low price, this is associated with, if we go to the demand curve, a high quantity demanded. Quantity demanded 2. And so to be very particular about this, quantity demanded is associated with a particular point on the demand curve, while the demand curve is a set of all of these points that show how price and quantity are associated. So with that out of the way, to make things more tangible, let's go through a bunch of different circumstances and think about whether they would result in a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. So in this first scenario, we say car dealerships slash prices by 10%. Would that result in a change in demand, which would involve shifting our demand curve? Or would it involve a shift along the curve, a change in quantity demanded? Pause the video and try to figure it out. Well, there's a couple of ways to think about it. In order to shift the demand curve itself, the one way I think about it is if you were to pick a given price, it does what's described here in any way shift the quantity that would be demanded at that price? Well, no, this is not shifting how much consumers would want to buy at that price. This is shifting the price itself. So this is going to be a shift along the demand curve. So this would be a scenario where maybe the equilibrium price, and we'll talk more about that in future videos, maybe the equilibrium price and quantity demanded are associated with that point right over here before car dealers slash their prices. So let's call this quantity demanded, let's call that quantity demanded 3. But then when they slash their prices, the prices go down. And so we end up with this point on our demand curve. And so this would be quantity demanded 4. So this would be a change in quantity demanded right over here. So change, I'll do delta for change in quantity demanded. And in this case, the quantity demanded would go up. What about the price of gasoline increases? Pause this video. Think about what would happen. Would that change the quantity demanded for the cars, or would it shift the entire demand curve? Well, I'll do the same exercise. Pick a given price. Let's say we're at this price right over here, and this is the current quantity demanded. Now, if all of a sudden, actually for any price that I pick, if the price of gasoline increases, consumers will just have less money in their pocket. The cost of maintaining and using a car at any price would go up. And so they might be willing to buy less cars because the operating cost has gone up. And this would be true at any price, at any price. And so one way to think about it is the entire demand curve, the way I've just phrased it, you could view for the entire demand curve would shift. So if we call this D1 here, now this would be D2.
Did you understand that?
No.
You see, I asked a question. I said, if for compliments, I asked a question that if the price of complement increases,
Increase.
here is, do you understand? Here it says, if the price of gasoline increases, you know, cars and gases are complement. You use them together. You know that, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
he's saying that if the price of gasoline increases, then the demand for cars will fall. Okay, you could see that the demand curve shift to the left, right?
Yes.
You wouldn't buy more. You wouldn't buy more gas. You won't buy more. You won't want to be buying more gases to the cars because the price of gas is high. Do you understand?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to quickly. But do you understand the graphs that is drawing?
Yes.
Okay, just like we talked about. We talked about change in demand, change the quantity demanded. For change the quantity demanded is usually along the demand curve. And he also mentioned that if you are talking about, see, that first one, he says, car dealership slashes price by 10%. Where would the change be? Would it be along the demand curve, or would the demand curve shift to the right or to the left? For the first one, where would the change be? That car dealership slashes prices by 10%. Is it going to be, will the demand curve shift to the right or left, or will there be changes along the demand curve? What's the answer to that? Do you know that, kayakers? Can you hear me? Okay, let's keep going.
So here we would say change in demand. And in this case, our change in demand, it would shift. It would go down. You could view it as shifting to the left. Actually, let me write that as shifting to the left because that's what it looks like on this graph. Let's do this third example. Change in demand and less cars because the operating cost has gone up. And this would be true at any price, at any price. And so one way to think about it is the entire demand curve, the way I've just phrased it, you could view for the entire demand curve would shift. So if we call this D1 here, now this would be D2. So here we would say change in demand. And in this case, our change in demand, it would shift. It would go down. You could view it as shifting to the left. Actually, let me write that as shifting to the left because that's what it looks like on this graph. Let's do this third example. Prices of public transportation goes down. What would happen? Is this a change in quantity demanded, or would it be a shift in the demand curve? Well, once again, for any given price that we are talking about, whether we're talking about here or whether we're talking about here, the substitute or one of the substitutes, which is public transportation, is now looking more favorable. So you can imagine people at a given price will just not demand, the market will just not demand as much of a quantity. And so this once again would be a change in the demand curve. When something is true for any given price along the curve, then you know that you're going to be shifting the curve. So our change in demand, and once again, we're going to shift to the left. So it's similar to bullet point 2. Now let's see. Here we say the state lowers vehicle registration fees. Pause this video and think about that. Well, once again, regardless of where we might be sitting along the demand curve now, if registration fees has gone down, now the total cost of ownership of a car has gone down, and so for any given price, people might be able to demand a little bit more car. And so here we would have a shift of the demand curve to the right. shift of the demand curve to the right. We could call this D3 right over here. So we have a change in the entire demand curve, not just quantity demanded, and we are going to the right. Let's do this. What is this? The fifth example. A recession leads to falling household incomes. Pause this video and think about it. Well, falling household incomes is actually analogous in some ways to the price of gasoline increases, because people are just going to have less incomes regardless of what point we are on the curve. People are just going to be able to buy less. So that's going to shift the demand curve, the entire demand curve, to the left. So it's a shift in demand or a change in demand, once again, going to the left. Last but not least, consumers expect new car prices to rise next year. What is that going to do to either, is that going to be a change in demand or a change in quantity demanded? Pause the video and think about it. Well, once again, this is something that applies regardless of where we happen to sit at a given moment on the curve, whatever the equilibrium price is, and we'll talk more about that in other videos. This is generally going to apply to any point that we are on the curve. If people expect prices to increase, if all of a sudden there's a bulletin that says, hey, car prices are going to double next year, well, then you can imagine wherever we are on the curve, people are going to say, oh, if car prices are going to double next year, I better buy more car right now. So our entire demand curve is going to shift to the right. So it's a change in the entire demand curve, and it is going to go to the right. So the big picture here, if we're talking about a change in, well, you could say a change in a particular price, someone raises the price or lowers the price, well, that's going to change the quantity demanded. And later when we draw the supply curve and we see where they intersect and you have an equilibrium price, when one or both of the curves shift, their intersecting point changes. And so then you could have a shift in the curves, which will then result in a change in the quantity demanded. But if we're talking about things that are generally true regardless of where we are on the curve, that will just affect people's general demand for something, that is going to shift the entire curve. It's going to be a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded.
Kayakers, is it clear?
A little bit.
A little bit. Which area needs clarification?
When when something increase, what happened to the curve? Do we shift to the right, to the left? And when you
I'm
explaining
listening.
about complement,
And
no
substitute.
yes,
Substitute and complement.
yes.
Okay. So, for example, if you take a look at this, where are we? I'm coming. Take a look at this graph, for example, this one. This is a graph of, let's say, kayakers buying shoes. Okay, look at this graph where demand curve shifts to the right and left. This particular graph is for the demand of shoes for kayakers, and this price is constant. What that means is that kayakers is not concerned about whether there's an increase in price or whether there is a decrease in price. She's not so concerned about that. That's not the major factor that determines if she's going to purchase buy the shoes or not. That's why you have this is changes in demand. Okay, so let me state that again. This graph belongs to kayakers, the demand for shoes. She's not so concerned about the price. She's much more concerned about other factors. Other factors like what? So under the demand functions, I'll go to the first one. Price of good while. Remember, price of good while could be substitute or complement. If they are substitutes, it means that you can completely use one to replace another. If they are perfect complement, simply means you have to use them together, right? And so I now said, if there is an increase in the price of Y for substitute, if there is an increase in the price of Y for substitute, can you tell me what you will do right here? This is for this substitute. This is Nike. This graph is Carcass demand for Nike shoes, and price of Y substitute is Adidas. So if there's an increase in the price of Y, which is Adidas, what would you do, Kayakers, on your graph here? What would you do?
It will shift to the right.
Why? Why will it shift to the right? What does it mean when you say shift to the right? What does it mean?
It means like I can afford it. It increased.
What are you buying? I said this is for Nike and Y is for Adidas. So what are you buying in this graph? What are you buying? What is the, if you say increase in what? Demand for what?
Shoes,
What
Nike.
shoes? Nike, good. If there is an increase in the price of Y, we are assuming that Nike and Adidas are perfect substitutes, meaning that you can completely replace Adidas with Nike and you can completely replace Nike with Adidas. So the question now is, if there's an increase in the price of Adidas, which is a perfect substitute, of course you would buy more of Nike, and that shifts the graph to the right. Okay, next.
Yeah.
If there's an increase in income, what would you do on this graph? You know what income means? Money. You have more money. Your parents
Yes.
send you more money from home. So what would you do on this graph?
I will buy more shoes.
You buy more shoes. Where would the graph shift to the right or to the left?
To the right.
Need to shift to right. Good. If there is an increase in your taste and fashion, meaning that you become more you like the product of Nike. Okay, your fashion sense has increased. What would happen on this graph here?
It will shift to the right.
It will shift to the right because you would buy more Nike. You will buy more Nike products, different type of Nike products, right? Let's go.
Yes.
So if there's an increase in consumer expectation, meaning that, oh, I am going to buy that Nike shoe because I feel it's going to give me more comfort. Will your graph shift to the right or will it shift to the left? Why will it shift?
To the right.
It will shift to the right because you have an expectation that uh, if you buy this product, it's going to give you more comfort, and so it will shift to the right. Okay, let's see. What about if there is an increase in the number of population? If there's an increase in the people within a country, what is going to happen? Will this graph shift to the right or will it shift to the left?
It will shift to the right. To the right.
Why?
There is increase in people, and people will want to buy more shoes.
Good. Buy more Nike shoes because we already said um, um, it's Nike shoes. So people will want to buy more Nike shoes. Okay.
Yes.
All right. We'll go for a 10 minutes break. Then when we come back, we'll continue. You don't need to just put it on mute. In 10 minutes, so we'll come back by in 10 minutes time. This is 11:06. Then we'll come back by 11:16. All right, let's get back to work. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, um, at least all we have done is at least a little bit clear to you. Change in demand, change in quantity demanded, and the way we go about um, the the charts, the curves or the graphs. Okay, for changes in quantity demanded is movement along the demand curve. For changes in demand is demand curve shift to the right or it shifts to the left. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's go on. Now, so I've explained demand function. So now under the demand functions, I mentioned that your consumption of a good, most importantly, when I was explaining budget line, I stated that the consumption of a good is dependent on income and the price. Income and price. Okay. And so let's look at what happens to your consumption of some certain type of goods if your income changes. Okay, so we'll take a look at changes in income. Um, so uh, let me state that again. Remember that I said, first of all, we've done budget line and inference curves. Don't forget that because we are going to be approaching some graphs that has a combination of both of them. Number two is we've talked about demand, changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded. And I talked about demand function. So demand function just looks at the mathematical relationship between the quantity demanded of a good and the price, or and the factors affecting the quantity demanded of that good, right? And so now part of those factors that determines if Kaya Case is going to buy a shoe or not is income, the money that she earns, right? And so let us look at what happens if there is a change in income. Let's assume that your income increases from $5,000 to $10,000. What are you going to do? So, as a person's total income rises, assuming price does not change, we might expect the quantity demanded of each good to increase. This can be seen in figure 3.3. This is the case for normal goods. So pay attention to that. Normal goods. For normal goods, as income increases, your consumption for the good will increase. Can you give me an example of a normal good? If your income increases, can you tell me some of the things you would buy?
Food.
Food, food is a necessity, of course. You don't have a choice than to buy food. Even if your income falls, you will still buy food. But if your income increases, let's say from $5,000 to $10,000, can you tell me one of the things that you're going to buy?
The car.
You are going to buy a car, or you buy a new wristwatch, or you buy, you're going to, I mean, you're going to spend good money on some things. All right.
Yes.
So that is a normal good. So a normal good is a good that as income increases, your consumption for that good also increases. As income increases, your consumption for that good also increases. Okay? You could see here, normal goods are good that increase in consumption as a result of increase in income. The point at which indifference curve is tangent to the budget line or constraint is known as optimization point, or point that you are most satisfied from consuming two goods. Okay, so let us look at this graph for change in income for normal goods. In this, what is this straight line called from what we have done before? This straight line, what is it called? The red lines, what are they called?
It's the budget line.
It's called budget line. Okay, what about the curves? The black curves that you have there. The black curves that you have there. What does that mean? The black curves A, B,
In
C, those
different
curves.
queue.
Indifference curves.
In
Okay?
different queue. Yes.
Okay, so if you look at the first curve, if your income increases, then you have a new budget line, I2. If your income increases, you have another budget line, I3. Remember that here I said the point at which the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line or constraint is known as optimization point or point at which you are most satisfied. So, first of all, this first indifference curve and the budget line, at what point would we say Kayakers is most satisfied from consuming good X and good Y? At what point? At a point where the indifference curve is tangent to the budget line. At what point do we say Kayakers is most satisfied? At the point where indifference curve is tangent to the budget line. Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
Yeah, so this red line shows that, for example, as your income is increasing, is moving from I2 to I1 to I2, from I2 to I3, from I3 to I4, from I4 to I5, from I5 to I6, it keeps increasing. Okay?
Mm.
Okay, and this is for normal goods. Remember, for normal goods, as income increases, your
I see.
consumption of that good increase. So
I see.
here it says, as income increases from I1 to I2 to I3, the quantity of goods and quantity of good X and good Y also increases from point A to point B and to point C. You can see that here. Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, so now, furthermore, when income changes, its effect on inferior good is different from normal goods. So let me ask you a question. If your income increases from $5,000 to $10,000, can you tell me some of the things you will stop buying? Can you tell me some of the things you wouldn't buy any longer? Can you tell me?
I will still buy something.
Yeah, tell me some
Maybe
of the things you will reduce in consumption. Some of the things that you reduce in its consumption.
clothes.
What kind of clothes? I mean, that you reduce. You wouldn't consume more of it like you used to buy.
Shoes. I will not buy more.
You will not buy more shoes.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
If I have a lot of shoes, why buy? I will not buy again more.
What brand of shoes won't you buy more? For example, if I have more money, maybe I'm going to buy
Mm.
some more Nike shoes. I'll buy lots of Nike shoes. But if I have more money, I might not buy. Um, I might not buy more of an office. You know what we call office shoes, like corporate shoes. Maybe because I don't like them. So to me, that might seem inferior. It doesn't mean that they are cheap. It means that as
Mm.
you earn more money, you will spend more money on the things that you like more. For example,
Okay.
if you are someone who likes some sneakers more, as you earn more money, you would buy more sneakers, or you buy. There's so many things you can buy, and there's so many things you can reduce in terms of consumption. So for inferior goods, as your income increases, you consume less of it. As your income increases for inferior goods, you consume less of it. Okay. So look at this graph. You could see On the left-hand side, the vertical, you see normal good. The horizontal, you see inferior goods. And from this graph, you can see that as your income increases, you are going to consume more of normal good. What about inferior? Are you going to consume more of inferior goods or less of inferior goods?
Less.
Less of inferior goods. You can see the graph. It shifts to the left. You can see the graph for good Y. It increases from Y1 to Y3. Okay? From Y1 to Y3. So, and this also, so if I ask you, show in the graph the effect of a change for inferior goods and normal goods. So for this graph, it's a combination of inferior goods and normal goods. For this graph, it's just a show of normal goods. Okay?
Yes.
So remember that now changing income is a major determinant in what you're going to buy. And also price is also a major determinant. Okay? When price changes, it has two different effects on people's choices. The substitution effect and the income effect. Let me see if we can get a let's see if we can get okay, let me play this first. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm going to play this too. Then I will be able to explain. Or should we explain first before the video, or do you want the video first before explanation?
The
Which one
video
should we,
first.
we should, okay. Let's do, I'll first play this one.
Talked about the law of demand, which tells us, and this is probably already somewhat intuitive for you, that if a certain good is currently at a higher price, that the quantity demanded will be quite low, and then as the price were to decrease, the quantity demanded would increase. So if we were to graph demand, and so this right over here is our demand curve, where price is on our vertical axis and quantity is on our horizontal axis, which is the standard convention and for most economists, you would have a downward sloping demand curve. What we're going to do in this video is dig a little bit deeper into why we have that downward sloping demand curve. And I know what some of y'all are saying, well, it kind of makes common sense. If the price goes down, I would want more of that. And so would everyone else. But let's dig into why you would want more of something as the price goes down. So one category of reasons why you might want more of it as the price goes down, economists will call the substitution effect. Substitution effect. And this is the idea that if we're looking at the price versus quantity, say, of candy, and let's say at first the price is right over here at $4, and at $4, the quantity demanded in the market would be, let's say that is 100 units of the candy, maybe it's 100 pounds of the candy, that if the price were to then go to $2 for some reason, so let's say the price is at $2, well then a lot of folks could say, gee, that candy is looking a lot better relative to other things that I might buy with my money. So for example, people might be picking between candy and fruit. And maybe at first they were both $4 a pound, but now all of a sudden if the candy is $2 a pound or $2 per unit, well then it's looking a lot better relative to the fruit. So some of that quantity of fruit people would have bought, they'll say, hey, now candy is a better deal. I'm going to substitute the fruit with candy. And so that's why you have a higher quantity of candy demanded. This might maybe be now 250 units. Another major category why you would expect this downward sloping demand curve for normal goods, and we'll talk about things like inferior goods in future videos, is the income effect. Income effect. And in some ways, this might be the most intuitive. Well, if the price went from $4 to $2, well, the cost of those 100 units would now be half as much. It would go from $400 to $200. And so the market would have an extra $200 to use to buy things with. And some of that extra $200, they'll buy more candy with it. And they might also buy other things with that. Now, the last dimension that economists will often talk about for why the law of demand is downward sloping like this, and we talk about this in other videos, is this idea of decreasing marginal utility. And that's that idea that first, if you're just that first amount of candy, there's going to be people in the market who take a lot of value from it. They are just addicted to candy. Their bodies are dependent on that candy. But as soon as those folks are satiated, that next incremental amount, that next marginal amount, the utility might be a little bit lower. And so as you have more and more candy, the marginal utility goes down. And so that's another way of thinking about why we have a downward sloping demand curve.
Oh, sorry, that was a incoming. Carcass, are you there?
Yes.
Did my picture show just now?
Sorry.
Did my video show? Did my face show?
No.
All right. I think I closed the just 1 second.
We drew the demand curve and talked about its shape. It slopes downward because the law of demand. When the price of a good goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. We also talked about how demand curves can slope down steeply or more gently. This we learned is determined by the price elasticity of demand, or how sensitive the quantity demanded is to a change in the price of a good. In this lecture, we ask, what determines when goods are really sensitive to price and when they aren't? There are two different effects that drive this, and we'll discuss both today. The first is the substitution effect, and the second is the income effect. The substitution effect is the extent to which a rise in the price of a good will lead to substitute towards other goods, holding all else constant. If the price of Coca-Cola goes up, for example, you'll buy fewer bottles of Coke because you've switched to Pepsi. The substitution effect will be larger the more substitutable are alternative goods. Consider, for example, insulin. Your body produces insulin to regulate how much sugar is in your blood. But for many people, this process doesn't work well in their body. That's what causes diabetes. So people with diabetes need to take artificial insulin to compensate. Without it, they could die if they eat too much sugar or not enough sugar. And there's no other medicine that works. So what happens if the price of artificial insulin goes up? It seems unlikely that a diabetic facing the risk of death would buy much less artificial insulin if the price goes up. Now consider the alternatives of pizza. Pizza is one of many goods you can consume if you're hungry. As we already talked about, you can eat cookies instead, or you get a burger or fries or just cook at home. The bottom line is that if the price of pizza goes up, you have a lot of other options. So we say that goods like insulin have a small substitution effect because there aren't good alternatives. And goods like pizza have a large substitution effect because there are good alternatives. But no matter the size of the substitution effect, it always leads to a shift away from a good as the price of a good goes up. The second effect is called the income effect, which is the extent to which you consume less of a good when its price rises, because that price increase has made you effectively poorer. Now, what do I mean by that? When the price of pizza goes up, in what sense are you poorer? I haven't taken any of your money. But what I've done is to restrict your opportunity set. When the price of pizza goes up, given your income, you can now buy fewer goods. So for example, let's return to the world where you have a budget of $12, pizza costs $2 per slice, and cookies cost $1 each. Recall that in this world, you decided to buy 3 slices of pizza and 6 cookies. Now suppose that the price of pizza goes up to $3. Suddenly your choices are more limited. You can no longer get 3 pizza slices and 6 cookies. If you want 3 slices of pizza, now you can only get 3 cookies before your budget is gone. So you've been made effectively poorer. It's as if your income went down. For the same income, you can get fewer goods. What determines how big the income effect is? There are 2 pieces. First, the income effect will be bigger the more of your income was spent on a good. Think about housing. If you spend half your income to pay the rent in your apartment, and rent goes up by 10%, that has a huge impact on your budget. You'll have to tighten your belt and maybe even find a smaller apartment. But if you're only spending 1% of your income on rent, the rent increase wouldn't affect you very much. You'll keep the apartment. Second, the income effect will depend on how income sensitive is your consumption decision. We call this the income elasticity of demand. Just like the price elasticity of demand measures how the quantity demanded responds to a change in price, the income elasticity of demand measures how the quantity demanded responds to a change in income. For some goods, if you're poor, you won't consume much less because you need them to live. We call these necessities. For other goods, if you're poor, you consume a lot less because you want to focus your resources on necessities. We call these luxuries. So for goods that are necessities, the income effect will be small, but for luxuries, it will be large. In fact, we can go further. For some necessities, the cut in income can actually cause you to consume more of a good. Consider ramen noodle, which is a cheap but tasteless form of nutrition. When you live at home and your parents pay for stuff, you might not eat much ramen. But when you go to college, you have to pay for stuff yourself. Suddenly your income's fallen a lot, and you might start consuming a lot more ramen. So getting poorer actually made you consume more of the good. We call goods with a negative income elasticity inferior goods. Inferior goods are goods that you consume more of when your income goes down. Think of stuff like ramen or maybe cheap fast food. For most goods, though, you consume less of them when you get poorer. These are called normal goods. Think of stuff like movie tickets or iPhones or nice dinners out. As you get poorer, you cut back on them. To wrap up this lecture, I want to present a table that summarizes everything we've gone through. For a normal good, if the price rises, the substitution effect means you consume less, and the income effect also means you consume less. The total effect is therefore that you consume less. If the price falls, it's the opposite. Both the substitution effect and the income effect mean you consume more. For an inferior good, if the price rises, the substitution effect means you consume less. The good's relative price went up. But the income effect means you consume more. The price went up, you feel poorer, and because it's an inferior good, you consume more. The total effect is ambiguous. It could go either way. For a price drop, it's the opposite. The substitution effect means you consume more, but the income effect means you consume less. You feel richer, and it's an inferior good like ramen noodles, so you buy less of it. The total effect is ambiguous. It could go either way. Remember, the substitution effect is easy. It always says that a price increase causes quantity demanded to decrease. The income effect is trickier. It changes directions depending on whether we're talking about a normal good or an inferior good.
Okay, Kayakes, is it clear? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay, so based on that video, I will just explain these concepts. Okay, so we've done foreign changes in income. Now we move to changes in goods prices. Okay, so under the changes in goods prices, that's where we have the income and substitution effect. Substitution effect occurs as a result of substituting one good for another. This occurs along the indifference curve, while the income effect is caused by a change in real income. It's a movement to a new indifference curve. So let's look at the first graph. Can you see the two red lines? The first
Yes.
graph by the left. You see that from good Y, the two red lines have a meeting point. Can you see that?
Yes.
What that means is that we assume that the income, or we assume that the price for good Y does not change. Okay? Or no, we assume that the income, okay, the income for good Y does not change. The income for good Y does not change. So we are just considering that of good X. Now, what happens if, let me see, if the price of X falls? If the price of X falls, what happens? If the price of X falls, what that means is that you will be willing to consume more of X. Okay, if the price of X falls, you'll be willing to consume more of X. And you can see from the first budget line, you could see A moves to B. The movement from A to B as a result of a decrease in the price of X is called the substitution effect. Okay, the substitution effect. Also, you know that if the price of X falls, that tells you is that you have more money in your pocket. Having more money in your pocket also means that you can shift to a new budget line. Now, and this is for normal goods. And shifting to a new budget line for the income effect, the movement is from point B to point C. That's the income effect. So from A to B, just like the video we watched, mean that you can substitute one good for another. So if the price of good X falls, which means price of good X is more cheaper than that of Y, it means I'm going to consume more of good X. And you can see that movement from A to B. That is the substitution effect. And at the same time, when the price of X falls, that also means that you have more money in your pocket. That's like an increase in your wealth. And so what happens? You can still consume more of good X. Okay, you can still consume more of good X. Okay, which is a movement from XB to X star star. That's X star star, which is a movement from B to C. The total movement from X star to X star star is known as, or it's an overall effect, or we say the total effect. Okay, so substitution effect, movement from A to B, income effect, movement from B to C. Okay, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, and this is for normal goods. This is for normal goods. Okay. Okay, so the one for the right, when there's an increase in price, when there's an increase in price, what happens? It's a reverse. Okay, when there's an increase in price of X, what happens? Okay, we see that you would have an inward budget line. Your budget line will shift inward. It means that if there's an increase in price of X, you are going to consume less of X. And that's where you see the movement from A to B, which is X star to XB. which is sub-effect. What that also means is that there will be a decline in the consumption of X. These are for normal goods, which will mean a movement from XB to X star star, X star star. The total of those effects are total effect, okay? At the total effect. You see a total increase in the consumption of X, that is the graph by the left, and the one by the right is the total reduction in the consumption of good X. These are for normal goods. Assuming they are for inferior goods, for example, if the price of Y increases, okay, we mention it depends on if, for example, if you are someone that you need to maybe health wise, you need to buy potato. Maybe potato is very important for your survival, just like in that video. Even if the price increases, whether normal or inferior, are you going to consume more of it?
Yes.
You will consume more because you don't have a choice, okay? Because you don't have a choice. But this graph is for normal goods. Let's see. So I explained the graphs here. In the first diagram, as the price of X falls, the quantity of X consumed increases. Thus, the utility maximizing choice shifts from A to C. The movement can be broken down into two effects. First, the sub-effect, and second, the income effect. Both effects cause more X to be bought when its price declines. In addition, the amount of Y also increases. In the second diagram, when the price of good X increases, the budget constraint shifts inward. This also shows two effects, the sub-effect and the income effect. Okay? The last one is what we call the given paradox. The given paradox is a situation where an increase in a goods price leads people to consume more of the good. Given paradox, or we say a given good. A given good. So a given good is when, as price increases, the consumption for that good also increase. So let us take a look at some review questions. What is demand? I'm sure you know that. What does the law of demand tell you? Differentiate between changes in demand and changes in quantity demanded. What are the factors that can lead to a change in demand aside the price of a product? When income changes, what happens to the consumption of normal goods? Explain and draw the graph. When income changes, what happens to the consumption of inferior good? Explain and draw the graph. Explain the income and substitution effect and show the diagram when there's a fall in price and when there's an increase in price. Explain the given paradox. Okay, do you have any questions?
No.
No? Okay, so I'm going to put your assignment. You're going to have the first assignment this week. It should be there by weekend. Okay, so I'm going to put the first assignment there by weekend. Okay, latest by weekend. Okay.
Okay.
All right. If there are no questions, then we can call it a day. All right. Do have a great day.
Thank you, sir. Same to you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Car. Guess have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.